One of the craziest things about the current state of our politics is that we are arguing about things that we settled long ago. We are arguing about things that were literally settled more than 200 years ago with the founding of this country and with the Constitution, which enshrined in very clear and direct language certain things that were fundamental. And those have been the bedrock of our legal and constitutional system ever since. But now, all of a sudden, we are debating some of these things and acting as if they're not clearly written in the Constitution. And I want to talk about one of those things here today, and that is due process. And specifically, who is entitled to due process? And even more specifically, are people who are in this country illegally entitled to due process? Because that really is at the heart of a lot of the debate that's going on around here. Now, before I get into it, I want to challenge those of you who may support Donald Trump's policies. I challenge you to watch this video and then let me know if you disagree with me. Please leave a comment if you do and explain to me exactly how and why you disagree. Okay, so please watch this video and share it with others who might be confused about the whole issue of due process. Now, to this question of who is entitled to due process, let us begin with the Constitution itself. There are two provisions of the Constitution which speak directly to this. Now, the first is the Fifth Amendment. Now, as you'll recall, the Fifth Amendment is part of the Bill of Rights, the Bill of Rights being the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. So this Fifth Amendment has been with us since the beginning. And it reads, in part, because it also deals with other things that are not relevant to this discussion, but it reads in part, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Pretty simple, right? The important part here, relevant to our conversation, is the first two words. No person. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. This is not limited to just American citizens or to legal residents of this country, but to any person, whether they are here legally or not. If they are a person, they are entitled. They have the right under our Constitution to due process of law. But it's not just the Fifth Amendment. There's also a relevant passage of the 14th Amendment. Now, the 14th Amendment came later than the Fifth, obviously. This is one of the amendments that was passed following the Civil War. And its purpose, in part, was to make sure that the rights guaranteed by the Constitution were also protected for individuals as against the states, that the states must protect these constitutional rights, that the states cannot violate constitutional rights of its citizens. And here's what it says. Nor shall any state, and again, this is in part because there are things in the 14th that are not relevant to our discussion, but it reads in part, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So if you just read the Constitution, those two relevant passages, it is very obvious who is entitled to due process in this country. And that is everyone, whether you are an American citizen, a legal resident, or someone who is here illegally. Everyone, every person is entitled to due process. That is a bedrock principle in this republic. And it's really not debatable. And if you don't believe me, because I'm just some guy on YouTube, just Google the text of the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment. Don't read what Wikipedia says about it or whatever website is returned to you in your Google search results. Search for the text. Read the text itself. Don't go through somebody else's filter summarizing what they think those provisions say. Read it yourself. Now that we've established that all people, any person, everyone is entitled to due process of law, I want to play a recent clip of the President of the United States speaking aboard Air Force One in the last couple of days. I want you to pay attention to what he says, and then I want to comment on a few of those things.
We're having a very hard time with judges because they don't want people to be moved out of the country. Shockingly, nobody's ever had this before, no other president. There's never been a time when this has ever become an issue, where they talk about due process, when you have millions of people that you're moving out that are really bad people, very dangerous people, and you have a judge that wants every single one of them to have a trial. So they want us to have millions of trials, therefore. And how long does the trial take? Weeks? Trial can take weeks. That's not what it's about. That's not what our country's about. And that's not what I got elected on. And these are judges that just want to, show how big and important they are. They're local federal judges, and they shouldn't be allowed to do it. We have hundreds of thousands of people that we want to get out of the country. And the courts are holding us back. Some judge that nobody ever heard of is holding us back.
So let me deal with a couple of things that he said there. Now, he said no other president has had to deal with this. Now let's get on the same page here about what we're talking about. Because the president ran on immigration, as we all know. He promised mass deportations, and that's what he is attempting to do now. And it's his right as president to do that, as long as he follows the law and the Constitution as he does it. But therein lies the problem. And the issue here is that not all of these deportations, quote unquote, because I would argue that not all of these are actually deportations. Deportation is a legal process, and that's the problem here. Not everyone who is being sent out of the country is being afforded that legal process. They are not going through our deportation process under law as set up by Congress. They are being taken out of the country outside of that legal and constitutional framework, and that's the problem. Now, most of the people who are being deported are going through that legal process. They are being given a hearing before an immigration judge who will make a determination whether they are in this country legally or not, and whether they are subject to removal or not, or whether they are going to be allowed to stay here. Most people are going through that process. So we don't need to lump everyone in and say that every deportation is not legal. Most of them are. The problem is there are a good number that are not going through that process. And, it's not an insignificant number. Even one person being denied that due process would be a grave injustice. But there are many, many more than just one. And that's a real problem. And so that's what we're talking about. We're talking here about people who are being arrested, given no hearing whatsoever, given no ability to challenge either their detention or their deportation or their removal from this country. They are simply essentially kidnapped because it's not being done pursuant to a valid warrant or the rule of law. They are being abducted. They are being held for a period of time in detention before finally being loaded onto a plane and taken out of this country. That's the problem. That's what I'm talking about here. And so when the president says no other president has had to deal with this, meaning with the courts telling him that he can't do this, that's because no other president really has done this, certainly not to this extent. So just because no other president has had to deal with this does not somehow prove his point that what is happening with the courts telling him he can't do this is somehow wrong. What's wrong here is that he's doing it in the first place. And that's why he's having to deal with the courts shutting him down, because he shouldn't be doing this. He also says, and I quote, "There's never been a time where this has ever become an issue, where they talk about due process." That statement right there really should bother you. But again, the reason here that they're talking about due process, meaning the courts, because he says where they talk about due process, the courts he's talking about, is because it's never really had to been said before by the courts. Everyone up until this point, all presidents have known that any person, as the 5th and 14th Amendments say, any person is entitled to due process. And so in the past, up until now, people who were, sought to be removed from, who the government sought to remove from this country, were afforded due process as required by the rule of law and the Constitution. Donald Trump came along and he's not giving them that, at least certain people. He's not giving them that. He is depriving them of their liberty without due process of law, in flagrant violation of the Fifth Amendment and of our statutes. And so that's why the courts are talking about this. That's why no other president has had to deal with this, because no other president has done this, at least so flagrantly and so repeatedly. He also says, and this is another important point about these trials. He says, quote, "They want to set millions of trials." And he talks about each trial taking weeks. Now that is flat out untrue. When we talk about due process, that will depend. What process is due is also a question. Okay, you say due process. Well, what is the process that is due? Well, it depends on the issue we're talking about. Now, if you are accused of a crime, the process that is due is that you have a right to be indicted by a grand jury, at least at the federal level, and most states also, but some states do a probable cause hearing instead of a grand jury indictment. But at least at the federal level in most states, you're entitled, before you can even be put on trial, to be indicted by a grand jury. That is, to have a grand jury look at the case and see if there's even probable cause to put you on trial. So once you have been indicted, then you have a right to a jury trial, for your guilt to be judged by a jury of your peers. Okay? That is the process that is due if you are charged with a crime. If the government is not charging you with a crime, but seeks to remove you from the country, to deport you because they claim you are not in this country illegally, well, a jury trial is not what you are entitled to, because you're not being charged with a crime. The process that is due, according to our laws, is an immigration hearing in front of an immigration judge. And by the way, immigration judges aren't even really judges. They're not Article 3 judges, meaning they're not within the judicial branch. They are Article 2 administrative law judges, administrative hearing officers, essentially. Article 2 is the executive branch. These immigration judges are under the executive branch, or within the executive branch. They report ultimately to the president himself. And it's not a jury trial. It's a hearing for to make the sole determination of whether the person is here legally or not, and whether they can legally be removed from the country or not. Okay? These are not long, drawn-out processes. They are short hearings. So when he talks about these judges want millions of trials, want every person that he seeks to deport to have a trial, millions of them, each of which would take weeks. That's simply not true. None of them are entitled to a trial, as most people understand that. It's not a jury trial, it's not a criminal trial, and it doesn't take weeks. There's no jury involved at all. It's simply an administrative hearing before an administrative law judge. They're quick. Okay, so that's simply not true at all. And here's another point. Okay, now I'm done here talking about what the president said in that clip. But I'm very concerned because the tribal nature of our politics are causing people who support Donald Trump to take these absurd positions where they deny what is clearly in the Constitution. And the irony of all this is that many of these people claim to be constitutionalists. They claim to support and defend the Constitution. If you've ever seen, Trump rallies televised, they have signs about the Constitution. You're always going to see a "Don't Tread on Me" sign over there, and all of this kind of stuff. They connect themselves to the revolution and the founding principles of our country, yet they deny what's clearly in the Constitution, and they deny the basic principles, not only of what's clearly written in the Constitution, but of the entire revolution, the entire American Revolution itself. The principles behind that they deny, yet claim to support the principles of the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence. Yet they're taking here, in their defense of Donald Trump, positions that are the exact opposite of all those principles which they claim they support. And so this is a real problem. And if we have a significant segment of this country that rejects basic constitutional rights guaranteed to everyone, I don't really need to explain why that's a really big problem. Now, one final thing about due process of law and it not applying only to American citizens or to legal residents, but to everyone, including people who are here illegally. I saw a good quote from Professor Timothy Snyder the other day, who researches and writes extensively on tyranny and authoritarian regimes. And he wrote this. He wrote, "If you accept that non-citizens have no right to due process, you are accepting that citizens have no right to due process. All the government has to do is claim that you are not a citizen. Without due process, you have no chance to prove the contrary." And he's exactly right. People need to understand this. Protecting and guaranteeing due process for everyone, including non-citizens and illegal aliens, it's not just to protect them from deprivations of life, liberty, or property without due process. It is to protect us. It is to protect American citizens from illegal deprivations of our life, our liberty, and our property. Because as the professor says, if all the president has to do is say that you are a non-citizen and therefore not entitled to any due process, meaning you never get to go in front of a judge, you never get to challenge your detention, you never get to challenge your deportation or your imprisonment. You don't get to say, "Hey, you've got the wrong guy." You don't even get to say that because you're entitled to no due process. Then all the president has to do is say that you are a non-citizen. Even if you are a citizen, even if you were born here, lived here your whole life, never left the country, all he has to do, and let's not limit this to Donald Trump, any president, because I got news for you. Donald Trump isn't going to be president forever. If we accept this principle now, that only American citizens are entitled to due process, or better put, that someone who's not here legally, that non-citizens or illegal aliens are not entitled to due process, then none of us are protected. Because any president, this one or any future president, all they have to do is have you arrested and say, you are not a citizen or you are here illegally, therefore you are entitled to no due process. Therefore, we don't have to let you have a hearing. We don't have to bring you before a judge. You can never challenge your arrest, your detention, your imprisonment. You don't even get to tell a judge that they've got the wrong guy or offer any evidence of your innocence. You never get that opportunity, even if you're an American citizen. That's why it's so important. Look, if Donald Trump wants to deport people who are here in this country illegally, he has every right under our laws and Constitution to do so. He won the election. He has the powers of the presidency. He has the power to enforce our laws. Our laws say that if you are here in this country illegally, you can be deported. He is entitled to do that. But he is not entitled to do that outside the bounds of the Constitution and the laws of this country. He is not entitled to do that without affording these people the process that is due, both by our Constitution and our laws. He talks in this clip about he won the election. These judges didn't win the election. He ran on these deportations. He won the election. So he gets to do these deportations. Yes, he does. But only if he does so legally. Winning an election does not entitle you to violate the Constitution or to violate our laws, even if you're doing so in keeping a campaign promise. Keep your campaign promises. You know, do your agenda. Pursue your policy goals. As president, you're allowed to do that. But you must obey the Constitution and our laws as you do it. It's what protects us. It protects each and every one of us. And protecting those who are in this country illegally and affording them their due process, even when they are ultimately deported, hey, if they're here illegally, they're here illegally. And our laws say they're deported. But you give them due process. If you don't, then we're all in danger. And we should all be worried about authoritarian government. Today, Donald Trump is president. That won't be the case forever. And those people who are supporting him and supporting his violations of the law and of the Constitution and a fundamental due process, one day they may not like the person who is wielding the power they now want Donald Trump to have. One day they may deeply, deeply regret that they're taking the positions that they are right now and empowering a president to violate the Constitution and the rule of law. Because one day it might be aimed at you, and it might one day be you who are held and imprisoned without any due process of law, without any opportunity to prove your innocence. You need to think beyond today. You need to think even beyond tomorrow. This is serious stuff. This should be beyond and above tribal partisan politics. Well, thank you for watching. And again, if you disagree with anything I've said here, leave a comment and let me know. Thanks for watching. Talk to you again soon.